Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pathways to Permanent Residency session hosted by the Lambton College Alumni Association in partnership with Long Mangoji LLP Immigration Law Group. My name is Megan Siddle, and I'm the Alumni Coordinator for the Lambton College Alumni Association. The Alumni Association is a thriving community of more than 60,000 graduates from Lambton College campuses in Sarnia, Toronto, and Mississauga. As an alumni, one of the amazing benefits you receive is access to informational and educational sessions such as today's webinar. In today's session, we're going to go over we're going to learn about work permit extensions, pathways to permanent residency, and what to do if your application is denied. There will also be time after today's presentation for a Q&A. Although we are joining each other virtually today, I want to take a moment for a brief land acknowledgement. At Lambton College, we are grateful for the land we live, teach, work, and learn on. We are proud to acknowledge that Lambton College is located on the beautiful homeland that is the traditional territory of the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa First Nations. These three individual nations make up the traditional Three Fires Confederacy, and we acknowledge the grace and the welcome they have offered to all students, staff, and guests at Lambton College. So let's get started. Today, I'm joined by Elizabeth Long and Zaya Sumar. Elizabeth and Zaya are barristers and solicitors for Long Mangoji LLP. Elizabeth is a leading immigration lawyer in Canada. She's an active advocate of immigrant and refugee rights in Canada and frequently presents and advises on immigration issues to organizations, universities, members of parliament, union, and the media. She has also testified several times before the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration on various immigration policies. Zaya practices encompass all areas of economic immigration through temporary and permanent residence applications in addition to citizenship. She assists a broad array of clientele in the economic streams, and she specializes in providing immigration planning strategies to large multinational organizations and corporations, as well as the small and medium-sized enterprise sector. She conducts informational presentations on immigration programs and has been invited to present across Canada and in the United States. Elizabeth, Zaya, thank you for offering to facilitate today's session for our alumni on obtaining permanent residency in Canada. Now I'm going to hand it over to the professionals. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Megan. It's fantastic to be here with you, and thank you for joining us on such a lovely day as well. So before we get started, just wanted to do some housekeeping. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them into the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. The only thing that we ask of you is not to put any personal questions like, this happened to me, what can I do? Because this is not the forum for it. It's not very private, and we don't really have the ability to sit down with you and go over your own situation. If you'd like to do something with that, please let us know. We can certainly arrange a consultation for you for your own personal matters. But if you do have general questions about immigration law, please do feel free to put them in the Q&A. And we'll spend some time at the end of the session to try to answer as many questions as possible. All right, let's get started. So today we're going to have two parts. The first part we're going to be talking about is temporary residence, because, while you have your work permit, what do you do? How do you extend your work permit if you need to extend it? What exactly do you need to keep in mind? So we're going to talk about that first, and then we'll move on to permanent residence options.
So, like Elizabeth was saying, while you're here in Canada, it's really important to make sure that you keep your status. What this means is that making sure that your temporary residence is always valid while you're physically here. Now, if you are on a postgrad work permit, for example, and that is expiring, you do want to make sure that you're submitting applications to extend your status so that you can keep being able to work and live in Canada. Now, when you submit an extension application, from the time that you submit it, as long as you submitted that application before the expiry date of your current permit and you've applied properly, you'll have what's called implied or maintained status. What this means is that you're able to continue working in Canada while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. So once you submit that extension application, that interim period that you're waiting for a decision from IRCC, you're able to continue working in Canada. Now that is as long as you apply properly, and you do have to remain in Canada while you're waiting for that decision on the extension application. Now, let's say you open up your work permit and you realize, oh no, I actually missed the expiry date. I didn't submit that extension application on time. What do you do then? Well, IRCC has a period for restoration. So for someone who has lost their status and they need to apply to get their status back, you can submit what's called a restoration application. Now, there's a very specific timeline. From the date that you lose your status, you have 90 days to submit your restoration application. So really important to make sure that if you have lost your status, you're submitting that restoration application within that 90-day time frame from when you lost your status.
So Zia, I just wanted to sort of chat about this implied status if you apply properly. Sometimes someone may not qualify for a particular work permit at the time when they submit the application. For example, let's say they needed an LMIA and the employer has applied, but they don't have the LMIA in hand yet. What would you suggest? Should they wait until they have their LMIA and the work permit has elapsed? Or should they apply before their work permit expires, and so they can get implied status? And would they get implied status if they don't have an LMIA?
Yeah, that's a great question. If they're here in Canada and that work permit is their status, then of course you do want to make sure you're keeping your status while you're here. And so submitting that extension application is going to be very important. That extension application has to be submitted before the expiry date of the current work permit. And so in this case, you do want to still make sure that you're submitting that extension application, explaining the situation, and then later on updating the extension application with the LMIA once it's been approved.
So
right? But really, oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so no, sorry, what I was going to say is that it's really important to make sure that that extension application is submitted, because that's what gives you the implied status or the maintained status, which allows you to continue working in Canada.
So basically, when we say you can only get implied status if you apply properly, it doesn't mean that you have to have everything in order to get maintained status. In order to get implied status, you have to have paid the right fees, submitted the right forms, and actually, online you get confirmation that you've submitted. Sometimes people don't press the button and it doesn't get submitted, okay? If that is done, then it's counted as if you've submitted the application. So even if your application gets rejected in the end because you don't have all the documents, then, you will have implied status, you will have legal status until a decision is made on your application, which right now could take 5 to 6 months. But if you didn't submit it properly, if you didn't put in the right fees, you didn't put in the right forms, or you didn't click it, and it's returned, then it's as if you never submitted it, and your status would end at the end of your work permit. Okay?
Exactly. One thing I do want to note, because this is a question that comes up quite often, is that when you submit your extension application, automatically IRCC issues a letter that says you're able to continue working in Canada. And on that letter, it provides a date and says, okay, you're able to continue working up until this date. That date is based on the date of your submission of your application. It's, I think, 120 days, if I'm not mistaken, from when you submitted your application. But the law is that you're able to continue working in Canada until you get a decision on that extension application. So in many cases right now, because of the current processing times being, like Elizabeth, like you said, 5 months, that date is coming up for, it's passing before a decision is actually made on the extension application. But because the law is that you can continue working until you have a decision, you are able to continue working regardless of what's written on that letter.
Yeah, so that letter, it's a computer generated letter, and that date, like Zia said, is just, a random 120 days. It's actually not accurate. You can continue to work until you actually get a decision. So, all of this can be very confusing, especially if your work permit is coming up and you don't know how to extend it, because post-grad work permits really, you're supposed to have it only once in your lifetime. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about how you might be able to extend your work permit if you have a post-grad work permit. And what I'm presenting today is just the tip of the iceberg. There are other ways to get work permits, but this is going to be some of the more common ways for you to be able to get a work permit if you need it before you get your permanent residence. So first of all, there's a special policy right now to extend work permits for work permit holders, postgrad work permit holders. If you currently hold a work permit or it expired before this year, 2023, and the current policy extends back to, I believe, was it last year, Zia?
I think it's September 2021.
Right. So basically, if you can still apply to extend it. This is a very, very special work permit extension policy. It's not normal. Okay, so if your postgrad work permit expires next year, you may not be able to access another extension. They've been extending this policy for the last couple of years, but there is no guarantee that they'll extend it next year. So if you don't qualify for this special policy to extend your postgrad, what can you do? The default way that the government will want someone to extend their work permit is through what's called a labor market impact assessment, LMIA. And the LMIA is basically a process where the employer would have to apply to Service Canada, which is the labor department in Canada, to get an opinion saying that by them hiring you, it would be a positive effect on the labor market. For the most part, the regular process would require the employer to advertise and try to recruit Canadians for the position that you want to take, and for them to show that they can't find a Canadian to do the job. Now, many employers may be reluctant to do so, and also many employers, even if they wanted to do it, may not be able to get the LMIA if you're doing a job that it's not difficult for them to find a Canadian to do the job. There are different kinds of LMIAs, but one of the LMIAs that we do work with a lot, especially for people in the STEM industries, the science, technology, math, what does E stand for? Electrics, something, the tech fields basically, and you have an occupation in that field, you may be able to get a LMIA without the employer having to advertise. They would have to do a labor market benefit plan where they say, oh, we're going to hire Canadians, we're going to train Canadians, etc. Okay, so that's the LMIA. Not the best one for students or international graduates, because there's a lot of burden on the employer to get, but sometimes you just don't have a choice. Okay. The bridging work permit is something that is an open work permit. And what happens with that is if you get accepted and you submit if you get an invitation to apply through Express Entry, for example, and you submit your application for permanent residence, and you're waiting for your permanent residence application to be decided, you can apply for a bridging work permit to extend your status and give you an open work permit. The same thing applies if you have a provincial nominee program and you get a provincial nomination. You can, and these are for programs that are not employer specific. So if you, for example, there are some programs like in Ontario, there's a master's or PhD program, and you submit it and you get an AOR, then you can do a bridging work permit. Okay, so this is where you have received approval for your permanent residence up to a certain stage. Then you can get a bridging work permit then. For other people who have who are nationals of certain countries, such as the US, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, the EU, Australia, Japan, and a host of Korea, Panama. I know I'm missing a few here. UK, Chile, that's right. And you have a job offer in one of the professional categories that is designated in one of these free trade agreements. The employer doesn't need to do an LMIA. As long as they offer you a job and we file what's called an offer of employment online, then we can apply for a work permit for you under the free trade agreement. The Francophone work permit is another one. If you are fluent in French, then, and you can, pass the exam, then we can apply for a work permit for you as long as you have a high skilled job offer. Oh no, actually right now it's any job, any jobs. It doesn't even need to be high skilled. And it's outside of Quebec. Okay. There are also special programs for citizens of Hong Kong, Iran, Syria, Turkey, and Sudan. The Ukrainian one has closed right now, but there are these are still open for people to get open work permits as well. There are a bunch of other things, but for the most part, it's not that easy to extend your work permit, especially if you don't have your permanent residence approved to some stage. So what we wanted to do right now is we're going to, first of all, talk to you about the kind of jobs that you should be thinking about, and then we're going to move on to permanent residence.
So while you're here and while you have a work permit, it's really important to be using that time in Canada on that work permit to the best that you can, so that you're able to then apply for permanent residence, which Elizabeth will talk about in a moment. And so when you're thinking about the jobs that you're working in, one of the ways that IRCC categorizes them is between what's called high-skilled versus low-skilled jobs. So theoretically, IRCC has taken all occupations and codified it and classified it under a tier system. So this is their NOC system right now. It's divided into 6 tiers. Anything that falls under tiers 0, 1, 2, 3 is considered to be high-skilled work. Anything that falls under tiers 4 and 5 is considered to be low-skilled. So what this means is basically through this NOC system, you get a 5-digit code. Each of these codes corresponds to a tier level. And again, depending on what that tier level is, it's either high-skilled or low-skilled. Now, this tier system came into place in November of last year. So it's a different classification system. And when that happened, some of the occupations that were previously considered to be low-skilled by IRCC actually became high-skilled. So occupations like truck drivers, PSWs, nurse aides, dental assistants, heavy equipment operators, tattoo artists, these were all previously considered to be low-skilled positions that now fall under a high-skilled occupation code. Additionally, some occupations that were before considered to be high-skilled unfortunately moved to the low-skilled category. So here we have tailors, other performers, program leaders in recreation, sports and fitness, and court clerks. These were all previously high-skilled roles and are now unfortunately considered to be low-skilled. We've included a link here on the slide, and the slides will be sent out, but the link actually goes through all the different knock codes and what the how they translated from the old system to the new system, the current system that IRCC is using.
And one thing I just wanted to emphasize is immigration law in Canada changes so much and so fast. The only way that we're able to really keep you sort of updated on some things that might affect you after you leave the session is we can send you different notifications on our newsletters. So we will be signing you guys up to our newsletters, and if you have any, if you don't like it, please feel free to unsubscribe. But you know, these newsletters will sort of try to keep you updated because you know this system just came in last year, and you know every time we do these sessions, quite often. Every time we do these sessions, something will change from the last time. All right, so let's move on to permanent residence. The first system that I wanted to speak with you about is the express entry system, which is the most popular system in Canada. And the express entry system, again, there's been new changes recently, just last month to it, and we'll go through that. But just to give you an overall of how the system works. First, in order to start the application, you're not actually applying, but first you have to actually create an online profile, okay? And you can create an online profile if you qualify under one of three categories: the Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, or the Federal Skilled Trades class. Once you create a profile, then you can enter the express entry pool. Now, it's very important that you understand, just because you've created an online profile and you enter the express entry pool, it does not mean that you have actually applied for permanent residence. Just because you've entered the pool does not mean that you would be eligible, for example, for a bridging work permit, okay? When you enter the express entry pool, it just means that you have said to the government, hey, look, I'm interested in applying, and oh, by the way, I qualify. Now, what happens after you enter the pool is you're going to get a series of points based on your background. And if you have provincial nomination, that's related to express entry. Every couple of weeks or so, the government will have a draw where they announce a number. Now, that number, where they announce can be based now on not just what your actual number, your score is, but it's also based on how you enter the pool sometimes, whether or not you have provincial nomination, and now also whether or not you belong to one of the specialized categories, okay? And so if you're lucky enough to get that invitation to apply during the draw, it's only then that you can actually submit your application for permanent residence. Okay, so let's talk about how to first enter the pool. Now, many of you probably already have the ability to enter the pool, even if you didn't work in Canada. That's because you may be able to qualify under the Federal Skilled Worker class. To qualify under the Federal Skilled Worker class, you have to have at least 1 year of high-skilled work experience in one occupation that is full-time, defined as at least 30 hours a week for 1 year. Now, this work experience, notice that I didn't say that it can't be self-employed. I didn't say that it had to be in Canada. So this work experience you can get from outside of Canada. You can get it even while you're studying, okay, as long as it meets the criteria. Then we look at your other points. You also have to meet the language requirements, and you have to have a financial savings, etc. So we use this category a lot for people who are not in Canada, or for people who have been self-employed, or for people who don't have that 1 year of work experience yet in Canada. Okay, and you can still get in even if you don't have that. Now, the second category is for people who have work experience in Canada, and it's defined as 1 year of high-skilled work experience. And it doesn't have to be in one occupation. It could be in different occupations, but it can't be obtained when you are studying as a full-time student. And it has to be legal in Canada. Your work experience has to be allowed in Canada. It has to be something where you are employed in Canada by a Canadian employer, by company in Canada. Okay, so employed means that you're not a contractor. What's the difference between a contractor and a contract? A contractor is someone who is not an employee. It's like if I'm hiring someone to paint my house, they're not my employee. I contract them, I give them a contract, I say, okay, how much is it to paint my house? $1,000? Okay, great. Here's $1,000, you can paint my house. That's a contractor. So if you are working for someone, they say, I don't want to bother my accountant. I'm just gonna give you a bunch of money and then you go and file your own taxes. That very well could mean that they are hiring as a contractor. And that work experience would not be allowed under the Canadian experience class. And it also doesn't give you points later on for express entry as well. So for the most part, when you want to get work experience, you want to make sure that you're getting a T4 at the end of the year, that you have income tax, CPP, and EI deducted from your payroll. Okay. The third one, not going to get into too much. Not very many people have this, and most people will qualify under the first two categories. It's for people in the trades, in construction trades. Okay, so now that we can get you into the pool, let's talk about how to get out of the pool. How do you get your score for the CRS system? So the first factor is age. Age is very important. And, when it gets to your 30th birthday, unfortunately, every birthday after that is not a happy birthday. Okay. Every year you get older in your 30s, it goes down, your points go down by 5 or 6 points. In your 40s, it goes down by -10, -11 points. By the age of 45, the good news is you don't have to worry about age anymore. But the bad news is that the age point is 0. Compared to someone in their 20s who has 110 points, that's a very significant deal. Education. If you have a program which is at least 3 years in length and another program on top. So let's say you had a bachelor's degree from home, and then you have your program from Lambton College, that will really boost your score. 2 programs as opposed to 1 really makes a person's score jump. Language points are very important, especially if you don't have any work experience in Canada. The language points normally in that situation that we're looking at is points for at least a CLB 9. So IELTS would be 7 in reading, writing, and speaking, 8 in listening, or CELPIP would be 9 in everything. This is, if you don't fall into one of the special categories that we're going to talk about, or if you don't have work experience in Canada, that's very important. So the relevant work experience that I was talking about, it's the same as a Canadian experience class. You have to be employed in Canada. You can't have gotten it while you are a full-time student, okay? For work experience outside of Canada, if you have high-skilled work experience, again, this is why Zia was telling you guys about getting high-skilled work experience, okay? So high-skilled work experience counts as well. If you have that work experience outside of Canada, we may be able to get points for you. Spouse. Now, who's a spouse in Canada? Well, we have 2 main definitions. One is someone you're married to, And the other one is someone who you are in a common law relationship. Common law relationship in immigration law is defined as someone that you have lived with in a conjugal relationship, like so not roommates, for example, okay, for at least 1 year, only 1 year, okay? And this is very important to mark, okay? If you, on all of your immigration application, they will always ask you, are you in a, what is your status? What is your, are you single, married, common law? If you have been living with someone for at least 1 year, you have to mark common law. Otherwise, it's a misrepresentation. Now, if you have a spouse who is also applying for permanent residence together with you, their background could boost your score, or perhaps they themselves could be the principal applicant before you. For example, if they have their open spousal work permit while you're studying, the work experience that they get could be counted for Canadian work experience before you, right? So if they're applying together with you, their education language, the spouse's education language and Canadian work experience can count for some points as well. Provincial nominee programs, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but essentially, not every provincial nominee program will give you 600 points. There are only certain provincial nominee programs that are designated as express entry programs. Those will give you 600 points. Previous study in Canada, you can get 15 points, for example, if you studied at Lambton College. Arranged employment. Now, you don't get arranged employment if you're on an open work permit, like the postgrad work permit. If you have an LMIA, or if you have employer-specific work permit, like the free trade agreement or francophone work permits, and you've been working your position for at least 1 year, then you can get arranged employment. If you have brothers or sisters who are Canadians or permanent residents, you get some points. Fluency in French is very important. You will get a lot of points for this, and there's also now a special French draw that we'll talk about. And then the trade certification, that's only for the construction and cooks and chefs as well, okay? So there is one more additional thing to consider about whether or not you'll get invited to apply for express entry, and that's the new category-based draws. So starting from last month, I think it was June 30th, the draws have started happening where the government has announced that they're going to do some special draws every once in a while. They haven't said exactly when. And it's for people with different backgrounds. So there's a French language proficiency. That's if you can pass the CLB of 7 for French as well. There's a healthcare occupation, so people who have at least 6 months. All these occupations, you have to have at least 6 months of work experience in the last 3 years in different occupations that they have designated. So there's a whole list. There's the healthcare occupations, STEM, occupations, trade occupations, transport occupations, agriculture and agri-food occupations. I put a link here. I'll be sending out these slides to you all who have been registered. And you can certainly click on there and see if you have an occupation that's on these special categories-based draws. So how these things work is, you indicate what your background work experience is, and you're just in the pool. You don't get to just apply to one of these draws, okay? There's no applying. What the government does is they comb through everyone's profile, and when they do these kind of draws, they will have a special draw for people who actually match their profiles, okay? So for example, if you have a very high language score and you put that in for French, and then they have a draw for French speakers, they could invite you to apply. And why is this important? It's important because when they do these draws, the pool for the people who, for example, have high proficiency in French is much smaller than the general draw. And as a result, if they say they want 2,000 people in the French-speaking proficiency, for example, that number is going to be much lower than the general draws, okay? And so the points, so if, for example, you're in healthcare, you may be able to put yourself into the pool, even if it's not as high as, your points are not as high as the general draws, okay? Now, one more thing about express entry, and that's related to the provincial nominee programs. So provincial nominee programs are programs where the province has made an agreement with the federal government so that each province has the ability to select people that they want to get permanent residence, okay? And Ontario's provincial nominee program is called the OINP, Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. Now, the OINP has different kinds of streams. The express entry stream, and only these will give you 600 points. If you're nominated, you'll get 600 points for express entry. And with that, you're basically assured that you're going to be able to apply for permanent residence. You're going to be invited to apply, okay? So how do they work? So in Ontario, you can't just go and apply to the Ontario Express Entry streams. You have to first be in the Express Entry pool and wait to receive a notification of interest. It's kind of like, you know, that dating site Bumble? I mean, I'm too old. I have not been on this, but I have heard from my friends who I live vicariously from that this is a website where the guys can't contact the women. It's the women, they have to wait until the women contact them before they can actually then interact with the women. Okay, so this is kind of like Bumble. Okay. The Ontario government is like the women, and you guys are like the guys. So you can be in the pool, and if they go to your profile and they swipe right, and they say, okay, we're interested, then they'll send you a notification of interest. So who are they going to be swiping right on? There are 3 categories that they have identified. The first category is the human capital stream. Now, this is something where you have to have a bachelor's degree. It doesn't have to be in Canada, it could be overseas. And they look at other things. So for example, they have, long before the federal government had said it, they had said, we're interested in the tech draws, okay? So they might be inviting people who have a background in tech to apply. Other times, there might be other things that they might, job offers or other occupations that they have invited, okay? This is kind of in competition now with the federal government. So we'll need to see how this goes. But currently, this is the situation. The second one is French speaking, again, kind of competition with the federal government, right? They have said that people who have bachelor's degrees and who have a high level in French, CLB7 in French, 6 in English, you can apply. And then the third one, this one's the one in skilled trades. So if you're in one of these identified construction trades and you've been working in that occupation for at least 1 year in Ontario in the last 2 years, you don't have to have a bachelor's degree or anything. As long as you have a work permit and you're working for 1 year in the skilled trades, they might also invite you to apply. All right.
Okay. So Elizabeth has gone through all the options with regards to express entry and looking at the Ontario provincial program for express entry streams. But there's also other streams that Ontario has that work outside of Express Entry. So what this means is that you don't have to be eligible in Express Entry. You're not looking at creating a profile. We're talking about programs that are specific to Ontario that are not tied to the Express Entry system. Now, with these non-Express Entry streams, the process of applying is using Ontario's Expression of Interest system. So it's the EOI system. And what that means is that anyone who is qualified through any of Ontario's programs, and we'll talk about a couple of them in a moment, the first step is creating a profile and going into the pool for the particular stream that you're interested in applying through. So, if you're looking at multiple streams, that means creating multiple profiles, going into multiple pools, but it is the first step is going into the Expression of Interest system and creating a profile. Now, once you've created a profile, you get a point. You're basically going in and you get a set of points. Based on your points, again, you're ranked against everybody else in the pool. Now, when we talk about the points allocations for Ontario, it's a little different than we see with Express Entry. So each pool or each stream is a little bit different in terms of which criteria apply for that particular stream when we're looking at the points. But what we see as a benefit for Ontario is that there are no points for age. So for those of you who might be joining us that when Elizabeth was talking about the age points in Express Entry thought, oh man, I'm going to not get any points or I'm going to get very few points for age. The Ontario program may be something to look at because there is no points. They don't look at age at all. In terms of criteria that Ontario uses, there's things like do you have a work permit or a study permit here in Canada? Have you worked here? What's your income over the last 5 years? So there's different criteria. It's very different than the Express Entry system. Now, when you're in the pool, Ontario goes in and again, they do a draw. So they'll go in and they'll say, today, we're selecting 2,000 people. They'll use their score system. Depending on the program, they can also look at the occupation of your work experience or of your job offer. And so they'll do a draw. Now, with these draws, Ontario doesn't announce in advance when they're going to do draws or what the criteria for the draws are going to be. And so what that means is that it's really important if you do qualify, if you are looking at the Ontario system, to be creating your profile as soon as possible, to going into the pool as soon as possible, because there is no set schedule, there is no set announcement in advance to say that this draw is going to happen. Once it happens, it's done. And then afterwards, Ontario will post online to say, okay, this is what the draw is that we have completed already. So really important if this is the program that you're thinking about, if you qualify to go into the pool as soon as possible. Now, let's look at some of these streams. So in Ontario, when we talk about the non-Express Entry streams, there are 3 that fall under the employer-based programs. And so these are for individuals who have a job offer and are working with their employer to apply through the Ontario system. It's still your application, but you do require the support of your employer. Now, like I said, there's 3 employer-based streams. We'll talk about each of them in a moment, but in each of these streams, there's always going to be requirements on you as the applicant, on the position that you're being offered, and on the company that's supporting your application. So let's start by talking about the requirements for the employer. So when we're looking at the company that you have a job offer through, that company needs to have been in business for at least 3 years. They have to have an operation here in Ontario. The job offer that they're giving you has to be full-time. It has to be permanent. In addition to that, if the employer is inside of the Greater Toronto Area, then they have to be able to show that in their past fiscal year, they had a gross income of at least 1 million, and they currently have at least 5 full-time employees that are Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Now, if that employer is outside of the Greater Toronto Area, those numbers decrease. So they only have to show gross income of at least 500,000 and they currently need to have 3 full-time employees that are Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Now, like I said, there's 3 programs that fall under the employer-based streams. The first is for international students. So this is someone who has completed their program of study here in Ontario. You do have to apply within 2 years of your graduation, and the particular program that you've completed needs to meet certain criteria. And so eligible programs are those that are either 2 years in length, or if it was a 1-year postgraduate program, which required a degree in order to be enrolled in that particular program. Now, with the international student stream, the job offer that you're being provided does have to be high skilled. And when we're looking at the wage that the employer is offering, it has to meet what's called the entry level wage. So it's a bit lower than some of the other programs that we're going to be talking about. But with the international student stream, so you do have to have completed the program, and you do have to apply within 2 years of graduation. So there's a very, very strict timeline in terms of when you submit this application. Now, the second employer-based stream is the skilled worker stream. Here in this program, you have to have at least 2 years of work experience in the same occupation as your job offer in Ontario. So if we're comparing the international student stream and the skilled worker stream, we see here with the skilled worker stream, you have to have a work experience, whereas there was no work experience requirement for the international student stream. But with the skilled worker stream, there's no education requirement. Okay, so there's Ontario is not looking to see what particular program or where you have studied. With the skilled worker stream, you do still need to have a job offer. It has to be high skilled, and the wage level has to meet the median level wage. So what that means is it's a bit higher than what we saw with the international student stream. It's the prevailing wage for the particular occupation in the location that you're working in. The third program here is the in-demand. So with the in-demand stream, Ontario has a list of occupations that they will consider for this particular program. Now, what's really interesting about this program is that this is the only stream we see that includes low-skilled occupations. Okay, so for those of you that may be working in a low-skilled position, or you have a spouse who's working in a low-skilled position, it's good to look at this in-demand list because this is the only program that we see that includes low-skilled positions. So the job offer that you are applying with does have to be on the list of occupations, and you need to have at least 9 months of work experience in that same occupation in Ontario. Now, those 9 months don't have to be with the same employer that you're applying with, but it does have to be in Ontario, and it does have to be authorized work experience here.
One last program that I wanted to canvas with you guys about is the caregiver program. Now, this is a program that could be for you, it could be for your spouse. And here's how it works. You have to have 12 months of full-time work experience in Canada, caring for children or elderly or disabled person in their home. So you have to be hired by the family themselves. You can't be hired by an institution to send you there. You have to be hired by the family, and you guys can work on an open work permit. Your spouses can work on an open work permit. You don't have to have anything else. You just work for someone in their home, taking care of their family for 12 months. You have to have a 1-year post-secondary education credential from anywhere in the world and meet the language benchmark of 5. That's it. That's the requirement. Once you have that, you can apply for permanent residence. There are certain quotas to meet. Normally, the one for children goes by really, really fast, like within a few hours when it opens, but the other one tends to be open for a much longer period of time each year. The program does take a longer period of time to process, although the government has said that they want to speed it up as well. But it is something to consider, I think, for many of you if, you know, you're looking for a position, it's difficult to get a permanent residence right now through express entry, or maybe your spouse might be able to do this as well. Okay. So we've talked a lot about the law and different programs. It can be very confusing. Let's just go through some concrete steps for you guys to do and keep in mind for next steps.
The first is that it's really important to have a plan, right? So setting out an immigration plan, knowing what your immigration goals are, setting out that plan, I think that's a very important first step. And, coming to programs like today's webinar, it's really, like Elizabeth was saying, there's many programs out there. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So it is important to sit down with someone who can go through your background specifically and identify what the options are that are available to you, what makes the most sense in with your background in terms of applying for permanent residence, for example, if that's your next step.
Now, once you have your plan, then it's about execution. And, sometimes you may or may not be able to get permanent residence right away. Sometimes you may have to do certain things. You may have to get certain jobs. You may need to study and practice the exam. All of that stems from the plan, but oftentimes the laws change, and so plans need to change as well. It's not necessarily easy right now to get permanent residence. In fact, it sometimes gets harder and harder. But still, I think, for most of you, you guys are really on the right path towards permanent residence. With your postgrad work permits, it is a lot easier for you guys to get the work experience. Don't waste your time, because time is very precious and time will go by really fast. And before you know it, your work permits may be expiring, and you should try to get your permanent residence before then.
So we started off today talking about staying in status and what temporary status is. And it's really, really important. We'll emphasize it again. Make sure that while you're here in Canada that you stay in status, keep your temporary residence. And, as you're applying, whether it's for temporary, permanent residence, really important to make sure you're not misrepresenting yourself. Misrepresentation carries a very, very heavy burden with it. If IRCC does find that you've misrepresented, you can be banned from any further applications for a period of 5 years. And then even after that, it does become more difficult to apply. Now, misrepresentation can be something as simple as just not even understanding what the question is, right? Like I know, Elizabeth, you went through, for example, what a spouse is. That's one of the common things that we see, that people may not understand what the definition is of a spouse. And so when they're going in and submitting their applications, they're indicating that they don't have one when maybe they really do. So really important to do understand what it is that you're applying for, what the different meanings are in immigration, and so that you're not inadvertently misrepresenting yourself.
And in law, Canadian law, we have, especially in immigration law, we have a rule that mistake of law is not an excuse. So you can't say, oh, I didn't know. You can't even say, an immigration officer told me this and it was wrong. You can't do that, because no matter what it is, you're supposed to know what the law actually is. Which is why you should be hiring a good lawyer to help you with the process. The fourth one is, if your application is rejected, contact a lawyer right away. Hopefully you're already working with a good lawyer who knows what they're doing and you don't get to that stage. But if you get your application to be rejected, contact a lawyer right away. First of all, there are very strict timelines to go to federal court for judicial review, to have the court review the application if it's unfair. And the notice period, if your decision is made inside Canada, is only 15 days. Okay. Also, sometimes people think, oh, immigration, they're so nice. Canadian government is so nice. They'll help me. And you call the call center and you finally get through to someone and you tell them, oh, you know what? This thing happened to me. What should I do now? And they say, oh, don't worry. Just I'll write a note in for you. Or you can write a letter to immigration and explain, and they'll help you out. And you do that and you think that everything's going to be okay. And chances are it probably won't be okay. And then after that, you go to a lawyer, for example, you come to me and you say, oh, Elizabeth, this is what happened. So unfair. Can you please help me? At that point, I can't go and submit another reconsideration. Okay. Because if you have an application rejected, you write something to immigration, that is already considered one reconsideration, and you only get one chance for reconsideration. So, don't just go and do something yourself. Immigration law is extremely one of the most complicated areas of law in Canada. And for most people navigating the system, it's near impossible to do it properly, okay, without proper training. There's also a lot of time limits as well. You may be out of status. You may need to file a restoration of status. So it's very, very important. Hopefully you don't get to that stage, but if you do get there, do contact a very good immigration lawyer right away. Okay, so we have come now to the question and answer. We're putting this for information for us on here. If you want to book a consultation to go over your own situation, please do contact us and we can schedule you guys in for a personal consultation with one of our lawyers at our firm. And please do let us know that you came from Lambton College, because we do give Lambton College alumni a discounted rate for the consultation. It's only $100 for you guys. Okay, so Zia, shall we go through some of these questions? By the way, guys, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A button section right now, and we'll start answering them.
Okay, so the first question we have, Elizabeth, is what can I do if I don't receive I think this is meant to say the implied status letter. So when they're applying for an extension, if they're not getting the implied status letter.
Right. So this letter that you get for implied status, it helps you to get the OHIP, and it sometimes helps you can show it to your employer, but it doesn't give you any status. You get implied status automatically when you have submitted your application, and you can have proof that you submitted your application. So sometimes if this letter doesn't come and your employer says, well, I need to make sure you're legally able to work in Canada, you can show a screenshot of your application, of your profile, to show, hey, look, it's still ongoing. I submitted the application before it expired and still ongoing. Okay. All right. Do international students under does the international student stream under OIMP fall under the express entry stream?
No, it doesn't. So the international student stream is one of the job offer streams, which is outside of express entry. So it's a non-express entry stream. Elizabeth, can a person apply for express entry and for an expression of interest at the same time? So any of the employer job offer streams, for example.
Yes, you absolutely can. Of course, you only get one PR at the end, but you can do both in parallel. So someone has a very specific question, and I'm not going to really go into, that. If you have specific questions, like say you should book a consultation, because it does take us a long time, around half an hour or so, for us to evaluate your situation before giving you the options. Basically, yeah, so basically they're wondering about LMIAs and OIMPs. Please do contact us and we'll go through options for you. Zia, when filing an express entry and you have a job offer without an LMIA, do you say yes or no under the question that says, do you have a job offer?
Yeah, so again, this is something that we would go through in terms of when we're actually a representative for someone, right? In terms of how to fill it out and what goes into the actual profile itself. When we talk about arranged employment in terms of points for express entry, It's a very specific definition. If someone has an open work permit and they have a job offer, that's not going to provide them with points in arranged employment. If they have a closed work permit, whether that's based on an LMIA or whether that is through one of the LMIA exempt categories, then they may be eligible for the points in arranged employment. But again, this is something that's very specific, and so that's something that we talk about during the consultation appointments. Elizabeth, can you apply in Express Entry and Canadian Experience class at the same time?
Canadian Experience class is part of Express Entry. And when you actually enter your profile, the computer system automatically determines whether or not you qualify under Canadian Experience class or Federal Skilled Worker class. And oftentimes it depends on the way that you're entering the information as to whether or not the computer system can properly figure out which program you qualify under. How does one enter into the non-Express Entry OIMP program?
So the first step is creating a profile in Ontario's expression of interest system. When you create a profile, you go into a pool of candidates that's specific to the particular stream that you're eligible through. At that point, then you're waiting to see if you get selected. So if you get an invitation to apply from Ontario, once you have the invitation to apply, that's when you can actually prepare and submit your application to Ontario for that particular stream.
And just one thing I wanted to mention, for the OIMP, when you are selected for the employer specific streams, you only have 14 days to submit your application, which is not a very long time. What I have seen a lot of people do, and maybe it's with the bad advice of consultants or lawyers who they had, mostly consultants that they had hired, is that they don't tell their employers before they enter into the pool. Then afterwards, they get an invitation to apply. All of a sudden, they're just asking their employees, hey, sign this form, because the employer-specific applications, they require the employer to participate in the program. And that is a very short period of time for most employers to decide whether or not they want to do it. And oftentimes, the employers may not themselves even qualify. So, it's very important, when we take on a client, for us to, before we even get started, before you even get hired, we speak to the employer, make sure the employer is on board with supporting you. Oftentimes, with the OIMP employer-specific, employer-based programs, the employer is required to give out financial information that they may want to keep private from their employees. As lawyers, we are bound by solicitor-client privilege, and we can create a firewall so that employers only share the information with us and we don't share the information with you. That may make it more comfortable for the employer to participate in the program. But it is very important, I feel, to have that initial call with your employer to make sure they're on board before you go through this program, because without the participation of your employer, and they do not like to be blindsided by someone telling them, oh, you have to fill out this form within within the next few days. So that's, just wanted to say that. Okay.
Perfect. The next question here, Elizabeth, is temporary resident to permanent resident still possible?
No, that was over a couple of years ago. When does the work permit start to count? Is it after the post-grad PGD program or during the program? Post-graduation diploma program or during the program? What is the duration of a work permit for a person studying for a 2-year program?
So the work permit, I'm assuming we're talking about the post-grad work permit here. The post-grad work permit you can only apply for once you've completed your program of study. So once you apply for it, it gets processed and then it'll be issued for, the duration will depend on the length of your program. So if you do a program that's anywhere between 8 months to under 2 years, then you'll be eligible for that same duration of a work permit. So if you did a 1-year program, you'd be eligible for a 1-year postgrad work permit. If you do a program that's 2 years or longer, then you'll be eligible for the maximum duration of work permit, which is 3 years.
Now, when you apply for your postgrad work permit, you can start working even without the work permit in your hand. As long as you've applied within 90 days of completing your program and you have you had a study permit that was still valid at the time of application, then you can continue to work. You can start working full-time while waiting for your work permit, which now can take 5-6 months. That period of time is counted as legal work experience for the purposes of express entry as well. Okay.
If you are married and your spouse is a permanent resident or a citizen in Canada, is it better that your spouse be the principal applicant?
So the spouse, if they don't need to apply, there's no principal applicant. But what they could do is sponsor you for spousal sponsorship. Now, whether or not someone should go for spousal sponsorship, apply on their own, that is entirely a different conversation that we would have to discuss with you. But certainly that could be an option if you're married or common law in a common law relationship with a Canadian or permanent resident. How long does it
Yeah,
take?
again, today's session, we're just going through some of the options. There certainly are many more options that we haven't gone over today. And so this is why it's really important to schedule that consultation appointment and so we can go through your background.
How long does it take to get permanent residency?
The processing times do depend on the program that you're applying through. During the consultation appointment, as we're going through your options, we're also talking about what that process is going to look like and what you can expect in processing times. For something like express entry, IRCC is working towards moving back to the average processing time of 6 months. Now, that only starts after you've received an invitation and have actually submitted your PR application. Other programs are longer, but again, it just depends on what you're applying through. When applying for express entry, can you select all provinces at the beginning of the application process?
If you wanted to, if you're okay with living in different provinces, you can certainly do that. The only thing about express entry is you cannot show that you want to live in Quebec, because if you do, then you are not allowed to apply for any federal programs, including express entry. They asked, do we have an office in Sarnia?
Our office is in Toronto, but all our appointments, everything can be done online through Zoom. So doesn't really matter where exactly you are. We're happy to meet with you, and we certainly will do it over Zoom.
Just to give you an idea, most people in Toronto don't even come and see us. I've probably seen people in person less times than I can count on my hand. Immigration is such that everything is online, everything is submitted online, documents don't need to be submitted there. So we don't really, we do everything using online Zoom. It's much easier than to try to go through traffic and come to our offices.
Elizabeth,
Yeah.
What about the co-op work permit and postgrad work permit?
Okay, so the co-op work permit, most of you should already have your postgrad work permit if you've just recently graduated from Lambton College. The co-op work permit is something that you get if you have a co-op program. That co-op work permit, however, is not available for you to just work just on something that is not part of your education program. So sometimes people say, oh, I have a co-op work permit and my studies are finished. I can keep working because my co-op work permit is still valid. That is not the case. Your co-op work permit is only for programs and you're only allowed to work based on your work permit on programs when you're studying. When you finish your program, then you apply for your postgrad work permit, and you can work based on the postgrad work permit then. Well, Zia, I think we have finished all the questions. I think this is something. I think we very rarely are able to do that within the time.
Amazing. It looks like actually one more question.
Yes, the question is, can we enter express entry programs and non-express? Oh no, they keep coming.
Oh.
Okay, we'll just okay, I'm going to quickly answer these two questions and then we'll stop. Can we enter express entry program and non-express? Yes, you can do both. After getting a postgrad, it's advisable to start processing the permanent if you qualify, and that's something that you should come for a consultation with us, and we'll determine when is the right time. Okay, done.
Amazing. All right. And as Elizabeth and Zaya have shared, there is information on how to contact them. They will also be following up a post session with some information on that. We highly recommend you taking advantage of those resources and scheduling a session if you need to get into anything in more detail. As they mentioned, there is a little bit of a discount for Lambton alumni. Also, if you are looking for more help navigating life following graduation, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Lambton College Graduate Services and Support Center. This center is a place dedicated to supporting international alumni as they seek employment and settle into Canadian life following graduation. So through this, you can access advice regarding permanent residency, career coaching and job search tools, financial and legal resources, support for family members, and workshops, as well as social events. You can contact us by emailing us at alumni@lambtoncollege.ca or by going to our website. And I will also be following up with you guys after today's session with some more information on that if you're interested in reaching out. So thank you so much, Elizabeth and Zaya, for your informative presentation. And thank you everyone for actively participating and taking the time to join us for our webinar today. I hope you guys all have a rest of a wonderful afternoon for you all.
Thank you, Megan. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.